Welcome back to Scripture Horror. Tonight we present 7 terrifying trucker tales that rattled drivers nationwide. If you are new here, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you never miss a bone-chilling story. Now, let's begin. Elena Rodriguez had been driving regional routes for 6 years, mostly short hauls between Phoenix and Albuquerque. She was practical, steady, level-headed, one of those drivers who didn't waste time on ghost stories, superstitions, or anything that couldn't be solved with a wrench and common sense. People around her joked that she was too skeptical for her own good. She saw it as a strength. The road was unpredictable enough. She had no interest in imaginary problems. On March 23, 2021, that certainty was destroyed during what should have been a simple overnight run through the Arizona desert on Interstate 40. She had left Phoenix at 11:00 p.m. with a load of electronic components, expecting to reach Albuquerque by 8 in the morning. It was a route she had driven dozens of times, and nothing about the night suggested trouble. Not at first. The sky was moonless and unusually dark, the kind of darkness that looked thick, as if the desert itself swallowed the headlights instead of reflecting them. But Elena had seen plenty of dark nights before, and she paid it no mind. Around 1:30 a.m., somewhere between Flagstaff and Winslow, her right front tire exploded. The sound was so loud it felt like a gunshot inside the cab. Her rig lurched violently to the side, but Elena reacted fast, fighting the wheel, keeping the truck steady until she guided it to the shoulder. Her heart hammered in her chest as she activated her hazard lights. For a moment she just sat there, palms sweating on the steering wheel, listening to the ticking engine cooling under the hood. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped out into the cold desert air. The silence out there felt wrong. Not peaceful, just empty. Too empty. The shredded tire was beyond saving. She muttered a low curse under her breath. A blowout here, in the middle of nowhere, with no traffic in sight, wasn't ideal. She called her company's roadside service and waited as the dispatcher checked availability. The answer she received knotted her stomach. 3 hours. That meant 3 hours alone on a dark stretch of Interstate 40 with nothing around her but sand, rock, and horizon. Elena didn't frighten easily, but even she felt a prickle at the back of her neck. This road could stay dead quiet for long stretches at night, but tonight seemed different, more isolated, heavier somehow. She climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and settled in for the long wait. That was when she smelled it. Cigarette smoke. Not just any cigarette smoke, cherry-flavored cigarette smoke, sharp and sweet, unmistakable. The kind she had never tolerated inside her truck. Elena frowned. Her windows were up. The vents weren't running. There was no logical way for that smell to be there. She twisted around and checked the sleeper berth behind her. Empty. She checked the door locks again. Still secure. The smell grew stronger, as if someone had just taken a long drag next to her and exhaled in the cab. Then she heard it. Breathing, not her own. Slow, calm, rhythmic, coming from the passenger seat. Elena froze. Her fingers tightened around the flashlight until her knuckles went white. She forced herself to turn her head slowly toward the passenger side. The seat was empty. Completely empty. But the breathing didn't stop. If anything, it grew clearer, as if someone unseen had leaned closer. Then the cushion dipped. Right there, in front of her eyes, the passenger seat compressed, sinking under the weight of someone she couldn't see. The radio flicked on by itself and blasted pure static. The sudden noise made her flinch. Through the white noise, a voice emerged, low, distorted, distant, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. "Don't look at the mirror," it said. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She held her breath. "Whatever you do," the voice continued, "don't look at the rearview mirror." Elena didn't want to look, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted up. In the reflection, a man sat in her passenger seat. Denim jacket. Baseball cap. Hands resting on his knees. Staring dead ahead at the windshield. His presence felt wrong in every possible way. Too still, too silent, too there. Elena jerked her head to the actual passenger seat. Empty. She looked back at the mirror. He was still there. Her phone rang, the sudden vibration startling her so badly she nearly dropped it. She snatched it up and felt her stomach twist. Caller ID, her own number. Her own number. She hesitated, then answered with trembling fingers. Her own voice spoke through the phone. "Get out of the truck. Now. Walk into the desert. Don't take anything with you. Walk until you can't see the highway anymore." Elena dropped the phone onto the dashboard as if it had burned her. The air inside the cab had turned icy cold. She could see her breath fogging in front of her face. The invisible passenger was still breathing beside her, slow, steady, and horribly calm. Then the voice returned, but this time it came from right next to her ear. "You're not supposed to be here tonight." Elena flinched violently. "The schedule was changed," the voice whispered. "You should have left tomorrow. This highway isn't safe for you right now." Her throat tightened as she forced out a question. "What? What do you want?" "Who are you?" The response slid down her spine like a blade of ice. "I'm trying to help you." Elena's skin crawled. "In 5 minutes," the voice continued, "a black SUV is going to pull up behind you. Don't let them see you. Hide in the sleeper berth. Don't make a sound." Everything inside her screamed to unlock the door and run into the desert, to put distance between herself and whatever had invaded her cab. But something in the voice, something urgent and strangely protective, made her hesitate. Her hands shook as she moved to the sleeper berth, pulling the curtain nearly closed except for a sliver she could peek through. Her heartbeat felt too loud. She worried it might be heard. 4 minutes later, headlights appeared on the horizon behind her rig. A black Chevrolet Suburban. It pulled up directly behind her trailer and stopped. Its headlights shut off immediately. No doors opened, no voices, no movement, just a silent, unmarked vehicle sitting in total darkness. Elena's breath hitched as she watched it from the tiny gap in the curtain. Every nerve in her body felt stretched to a breaking point. 5 minutes passed, then 10, 15. The SUV didn't move, didn't turn its lights back on, didn't reveal who or what was inside. It simply idled behind her like a predator waiting for its moment. Her phone rang again, making her flinch so hard she almost hit her head on the upper bunk. This time, the caller ID showed her roadside service. She answered, barely breathing. The dispatcher told her the repair truck was 10 minutes away. The moment Elena ended the call, the black SUV's engine rumbled to life. Without turning on its lights, it sped off into the desert night, disappearing down the highway faster than any normal driver would dare. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She whispered into the darkness of the cab. "What? What was that?" "What's happening?" There was no reply. The breathing was gone. The temperature returned to normal, warm again, almost instantly, as if someone had heated the air with a furnace. The cherry-flavored cigarette smell vanished as though it had never existed. The seat cushion rose back into shape. Her invisible passenger had left her cab as silently as he'd arrived. Elena sat frozen until the repair truck finally pulled up behind her. The technician approached with a cheerful wave, oblivious to the terror that had just unfolded. He changed her tire quickly, chatting casually about traffic, weather, and long nights on the job. Elena barely responded. She didn't trust her voice not to crack. She finished her route without further incident and reached Albuquerque on time. But the story didn't end there. 3 days later, Elena was sitting in a diner off Route 66 when a breaking news segment flashed on the TV above the counter. The reporter's voice cut straight through her. 2 truck drivers had been found murdered on Interstate 40 between Flagstaff and Winslow. Both killed on the same night she'd had the blowout. Both pulled over on the shoulder with vehicle trouble. Both approached by suspects in a black SUV. Investigators were still searching for the vehicle. Witness descriptions varied. No license plate. No clear leads. No explanation why the killers struck that night. No reason to believe they wouldn't strike again. Elena stared at the screen, numb, cold, unable to swallow. There was no rational explanation for how the voice in her cab had known. No logical way it could have predicted the SUV's arrival. No reason it should have warned her, yet it had. And if she had ignored it, if she had looked away, or stepped outside, or hesitated for even a moment, she wasn't sure she'd be alive. She tried to rationalize what had happened. Stress. Fatigue. A hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. Maybe a carbon monoxide leak. Something, anything normal. But the repair technician had checked her cab thoroughly, and found nothing wrong. No leaks, no malfunctions. No reason for phantom breathing, radio interference, or temperature drops. No explanation for why her phone had called her from her own number. And the mirror. She refused to think about the mirror. Elena still drives the same routes, but she no longer feels alone in her cab. Late at night, when the highway is empty and the desert stretches out like an ocean of darkness, she sometimes smells cherry-flavored cigarette smoke. Sometimes she hears slow, steady breathing beside her. Sometimes the passenger seat cushion dips, as if someone unseen has settled in. She doesn't look at the mirror anymore. And whenever she gets the urge to pull over on a dark, isolated stretch of highway, she keeps driving until she finds a well-lit truck stop, no matter how long it takes. She understands something now. The road holds dangers she can't explain. But it also holds protections. Things that watch, things that know, things that intervene for reasons she'll never fully understand. And sometimes, the things we can't see are watching over us more carefully than we realize. Fars tossed the men there's Terce town. By the fall of 2019, he knew every bend of Highway 50 between Kansas City and Denver better than he knew the back roads of his own hometown. And on October 14th of that year, in the quiet hours past midnight, he was running that familiar route once again, hauling agricultural equipment westward through the flat, empty spine of eastern Colorado. The sky was clear enough that the stars almost felt intrusive, too sharp, too bright, like a cold audience watching his truck roll across the dark plains. His CB radio was dead silent. His headlights stretched across asphalt so smooth and empty that it looked more like black glass than a road. It was one of those nights where the world felt paused. No distant taillights, no semis in his mirrors, not even a flicker of movement in the endless fields on both sides of the highway. Just him, the hum of his engine, and hours of darkness ahead. He checked the dashboard clock as he passed a reflective sign. 2:47 a.m. The perfect dead zone of the night. Too late for insomniacs, and too early for early risers. That was when he noticed the truck stop. A blue and white glow appeared in the distance, rising out of the darkness like a beacon. As he got closer, the sign became clear. Miller's Rest Stop. 24 hours. Printed in a font so ordinary it felt almost unsettling in its plainness. James frowned. He knew every single stop along this route. He knew which ones had good coffee, which ones had miserable coffee, and which ones you stopped at only when your bladder was about to rupture. But this one? He had never seen it before. Not once. Not after hundreds of trips. Still, his fuel gauge was dipping lower than he liked, hovering just above the threshold where the warning light would flick on. The next stop he trusted was nearly 90 miles ahead. He muttered to himself, debating, but the practical part of him, the part that had kept him alive and employed for 12 years, made the decision. He signaled, eased onto the exit ramp, and pulled into Miller's Rest Stop. The parking lot was massive, rows and rows of painted spaces stretching out under harsh fluorescent floodlights, and not a single spot was occupied. Not one car, not one semi, not one person. Fresh gravel crunched under his boots as he stepped out. The air felt strangely heavy, almost humid, even though eastern Colorado's nights were dry enough to crack your lips. The lights above hummed with an electric buzz so loud it sounded unnatural in the empty desert air. As he walked toward the diesel pump, he scanned the lot again. Pristine asphalt. No tire marks, no puddles of leaked oil, no trash, no movement. It was like someone had built the place yesterday and forgotten to tell anyone. He slid his company fuel card into the machine. Error. He tried again. Error. Another swipe. Error. 5 minutes of retrying, cleaning the card, checking the chip, even pressing the button slower, as if maybe the pump needed coaxing. But every time, the same cold digital blink. Finally, irritation mixing with a growing sense of unease, he gave up. He climbed back into his cab, shut the door harder than he meant to, and pulled out of the lot. As his tires rolled back onto Highway 50, he exhaled deeply and shook out the tension in his shoulders. His GPS showed his little blue arrow moving west toward Denver exactly as it should. His fuel would make it to the next known stop. Everything was normal again, for about 15 minutes. Because 15 minutes later, glowing in the distance through the darkness, James saw a sign, a blue and white sign. Miller's rest stop. 24 hours. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. He stared ahead, eyebrows drawn tight, waiting for his brain to correct itself, waiting for something to make sense. But no amount of blinking or squinting changed the fact that the exact same truck stop, the same sign, same font, same glow, was approaching on his right. His GPS said he had been traveling west at 65 miles an hour since he left the stop. His odometer supported that. There was no way he should be seeing the same place again, not unless it had somehow teleported itself onto the road 30 miles ahead. But there it was. James didn't slow down. He refused to take the exit. He drove past the stop, eyes locked forward. His breath came quicker, heavier, and he kept glancing between his mirrors, the black fields, and the stretch of road that suddenly felt unstable, like it might peel away or loop backward if he blinked wrong. 20 minutes later, after he had tried to distract himself with a podcast he didn't actually hear, the sign appeared again. Miller's rest stop. 24 hours. Same empty lot. Same glare. Same layout. His heart hammered against his ribs. Something was wrong with the world around him, wrong in a way that logic couldn't explain. He grabbed his CB microphone with shaking hands and switched to channel 19. Breaker 19. Anyone out here on Highway 50 in East Colorado? Got a situation here. Static. He tried again. Louder. More desperate. Static. He pulled out his phone full bars, but when he tried calling his dispatcher, the call failed instantly. No ringing, no click. Nothing. On the fourth pass, something changed. This time, the parking lot wasn't empty. A truck sat under the humming lights. A Peterbilt with a distinctive green and yellow paint job, peeling slightly on the edges of the hood. The exact paint job his own rig had. The exact company logo on the door. The exact model, same chrome grille, same configuration. His truck, but he was in his truck. He was driving it. Yet the version in the lot sat silent, dark, and abandoned. James felt the kind of fear that squeezes the lungs shut. He slammed the accelerator harder, watching his speed climb 70, 75, 80, but the road ahead seemed to stretch, elongate, almost ripple. He passed a mile marker, 215. 10 minutes later, he passed it again, 205. Same cluster of scrub brush on the right, same missing slat in the fence. Same crack in the asphalt he'd noticed the first time. The world had become a loop, a perfect 15-mile cage. On the seventh pass, something stood under the fluorescent lights. A person. A figure wearing a flannel shirt and a trucker cap, waving both arms as if signaling him to pull in. As James got closer, the figure stepped forward into the full wash of white light. He saw the face, his own expression but warped with fear, mouth open wide in a silent scream, eyes locked onto him with a desperate warning. The figure pointed at something behind him, something James couldn't see, then pointed again, more frantic, as if begging him to stop. James's body went cold from the inside outward. He ripped his gaze from the figure, stared at the highway, shut his eyes for a moment, and forced himself to count to 10. 1 breath, 2, 3. He couldn't afford to panic. Not here. Not now. When he opened his eyes again, he made a decision. The next time he saw the sign, if it appeared again, he would pull in. He would confront whatever was happening, face it directly. But the sign never reappeared. Minutes passed. Then more. He watched the mile markers blinking by in the correct order. 288, 243, 247. His GPS showed normal progression. The landscape shifted, revealing new terrain. Hills. A distant farmhouse. Changes that shouldn't exist inside the loop. The loop had released him. When he reached the next legitimate truck stop, he sat in his cab for nearly 20 minutes before he trusted himself to step out. His hands were still trembling when he swiped his fuel card, and this time the machine accepted it instantly. Everything worked the way it always had. No glitches, no loops, no copies of his truck, no reflections of himself screaming in silence. In the days that followed, he told no one, not his dispatcher, not his co-workers, not even his closest friend in the company. But curiosity gnawed at him, refusing to die. So he checked the truck's computer logs. and they showed something impossible. During that hour and a half, he'd been trapped on Highway 50, where he should have covered roughly 90 miles at his consistent speed. His odometer recorded only 2.3 miles of total movement, yet his fuel consumption matched what 90 miles of driving would normally burn. He had covered almost no physical ground. And that wasn't the worst part. James had taken a photo during the incident, a picture of his dashboard meant to show the strange readings, hoping he could use it as proof if he ever decided to report what happened. When he later examined the photo more closely, zooming in on the faint reflection in the windshield, he saw something in the background. The parking lot. The same identical lot. And his double's abandoned truck sitting under the buzzing lights. He hadn't noticed it when he snapped the picture. He hadn't even looked outside, but the reflection captured it perfectly. It was there, watching him. Waiting. He still drives Highway 50. It's his route, his job, his livelihood, but he never drives it at night anymore. Never when the sky turns that deep, dark black that hides the edges of the world. His CB radio stays on constantly now, not for communication, but for the comfort of having another voice, even static beside him. And no matter how desperate he gets, no matter how low his fuel dips, he will never stop at a truck stop he doesn't recognize. Because somewhere on a stretch of highway that shouldn't exist, he believes another version of himself is still trapped. Caught in an endless 15-mile loop, driving forever, passing the same empty spaces, the same broken fence, the same abandoned rig, unable to escape a night that refuses to end. And he fears that if he ever stops at the wrong place again, he might take that man's place. James Thornton had spent 23 years hauling specialized hazmat loads, the kind of freight that required nerves of steel and a willingness to drive into industrial facilities most people would never know existed. He'd been inside chemical plants in the middle of deserts, refineries hidden behind military fencing, and research labs tucked so far off the grid that they didn't appear on any map. Nothing surprised him anymore until November 8, 2018. That day, his dispatcher sent him coordinates for a pickup in rural Wyoming, roughly 40 miles northeast of Casper. The order listed the cargo as laboratory equipment with standard chemical protocols, nothing unusual on paper. But the pickup location was identified only as Facility 7, with GPS coordinates and no street address attached. That was the first sign something wasn't right. James plugged the coordinates into his navigation system, expecting maybe an isolated research site or an old mining operation. Instead, the route pulled him off Interstate 25, then onto smaller and smaller roads until he was driving across gravel that cut through empty ranch land stretching as far as he could see. No buildings, no power lines, no machinery. Just open prairie and wind. Yet the GPS insisted he was getting closer. He kept watching the distance to destination shrink. 1 mile, half a mile, a quarter, until finally his navigation announced that he had arrived. But all he saw was open grassland and a barbed wire fence that looked like it had been there for a century. He idled on the shoulder, confused. He checked the coordinates again. They matched perfectly. He dialed his dispatcher, who confirmed the location and told him the facility contact would meet him at the gate. James stared across the empty prairie, wondering if this was some elaborate screw-up. Then something caught his eye. He almost missed it at first. A small concrete post about 50 yards off the road, low to the ground, weathered, almost blending into the landscape. Mounted on it was a keypad. He climbed out of his truck and walked toward the post. Before he reached it, the ground directly in front of him began to rise. A rectangular slab of earth, grass, and dirt still clinging to the top lifted straight upward like an enormous hidden door. Beneath it, a paved ramp descended into darkness. A speaker on the concrete post crackled to life with a cold, automated voice. Proceed down the ramp. Follow the blue lights. Do not deviate from the marked route. Do not stop. Do not exit your vehicle. The voice carried no emotion, no human cadence at all. James stood frozen for a second, wondering if he should turn around and drive away. But hazmat jobs paid extremely well, and he'd been inside secure facilities before with strict protocols. He forced himself back into the cab, started the engine, and eased forward. The massive gate lowered behind him as he descended, sealing off the prairie above as if it had never opened at all. The tunnel was immaculate, smooth walls, smooth pavement, illuminated by strips of blue LED lights running the entire length on both sides. The road sloped downward at a steady angle, no sharp turns, no intersections, just a perfectly straight descent. James checked his odometer out of instinct. After 1 mile underground, the radio signal died completely. At 2 miles, his ears popped from the pressure shift. At 3 miles, his cell phone showed no service. At 4 miles, the tunnel finally widened into a cavern so enormous it made him grip the wheel tighter. It looked like it had been carved out of the earth by something far more precise than mining equipment. The chamber stretched farther than the lights could reach, easily the size of several football fields, maybe more. The ceiling vanished into shadow far above. The blue lights guided him along a marked lane toward a loading dock where several figures waited. People dressed head to toe in white containment suits, faces hidden behind reflective visors. They didn't gesture for him to stop so much as silently direct him into position with synchronized motions, as if they'd rehearsed the entire process. Once parked, he stayed in the cab, watching them move. Their suits were completely smooth, no visible seams, no identifying patches or agency logos. They loaded sealed black containers into his trailer using a forklift, each container identical, featureless, unmarked. They made no noise when moved, no sloshing, no shifting, nothing. The entire loading process took about 20 minutes, during which James kept noticing details he couldn't shake. The chamber didn't just extend outward, it continued into darkness in at least 3 directions. He saw outlines of other tunnels branching away, each large enough to drive a convoy through. He could feel a low, distant vibration in his chest, like machinery humming somewhere far below the floor. And most unsettling of all, the walls of the chamber had doors. Dozens of them. All identical, spaced regularly like units in some underground installation. No windows. No labels. Just sealed metal doors leading deeper into the unknown. One of the containment-suited figures approached his window, handed him a clipboard, and stepped back without a word. The shipping manifest was unlike anything he'd transported in his career. The destination was listed as Site 12, Nevada, with another set of GPS coordinates, but the cargo description stopped him cold. Biological samples. Maintain temperature below 80 degrees. Do not inspect contents. Do not deviate from route. Any delay exceeding 30 minutes will result in containment protocols. James rolled down his window a little and asked, "What kind of biological samples?" The figure didn't answer. It simply pointed back toward the tunnel. He took the paperwork, sealed the trailer, and began his ascent. Immediately, he realized something was different. On the way down, the tunnel had been seamless. But now, spaced evenly along the walls, were doors, metal, identical, spaced every 100 yards. He was absolutely certain they hadn't been there before. The blue LED lights seemed to pulse now, the rhythm faint but noticeable, a slow beat that matched the thump of his own racing heart. He accelerated, feeling panic creep into his chest. By the time he reached the gate and emerged back into Wyoming daylight, he felt like he'd been holding his breath for miles. The grassy slab silently lowered into place behind him until the landscape looked untouched again, as if the entire facility had never existed. James sat in his cab for 10 minutes, breathing hard, staring at the empty prairie. He considered calling the dispatcher again, but he knew he wouldn't get any answers. He followed the GPS route to Nevada and delivered the load to another underground site. This one was only half a mile deep, but the experience was the same. Anonymous suits, silent unloading, no explanations. He received his payment electronically the moment the last container left his trailer. 2 weeks later, unable to shake the experience, James drove back to the Wyoming coordinates. He arrived during daylight, expecting at least the concrete post or some sign of disturbance in the soil. But there was nothing. No post, no keypad, no discoloration in the grass, no tracks, no seams in the earth. He walked the area for nearly an hour. The prairie looked untouched, undisturbed, normal. He contacted his dispatcher again, but the job record was gone, not archived, deleted. The system showed no record of Facility 7, no pickup on that date, no manifest, nothing. But the payment still sat in his account. The sender was listed as Tertiary Logistics Solutions, a company with no presence online, no registry, no tax records, no contact information. James filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Wyoming state government asking about underground facilities at those coordinates. The response stated that no such structures existed or had ever been approved. He contacted the Bureau of Land Management, same answer. He hired a private surveyor who conducted a ground-penetrating radar scan over the entire site. The results showed only solid earth and bedrock. No tunnels, no chambers. Nothing remotely resembling what he'd driven through. But James knew what he'd seen. He knew he had driven 4 miles underground through a perfectly engineered tunnel. He knew he'd entered a chamber so large it rivaled an aircraft hangar. He knew those containment-suited figures had loaded something into his trailer, something biological, something that required extreme cold, something that couldn't be delayed. And late at night, when he tried to sleep, he kept thinking about the black containers, about the vibration in his chest, about the doors lining the chamber walls, about the doors he saw on the tunnel walls during his ascent that hadn't existed on the way down. He wondered what was behind them. He wondered why the tunnel changed. He wondered who operated a facility the government insisted did not exist. He wondered what he had transported across state lines. And most disturbing of all, he wondered what would happen if those biological samples ever warmed above their required temperature. James still drives hazmat loads. The pay is steady, the benefits good, and after decades on the road, it's the life he knows. But he has never again received a pickup from coordinates without an address. He has never again seen a facility listed only by number. And he's never told another driver about Facility 7, because he knows how it sounds. Impossible. Delusional. But in 3 different locations, encrypted and backed up, James keeps one piece of proof he trusts more than any survey, any FOIA response, or any denial from any agency. The GPS log from that day. A digital record showing the route he drove underground, the miles he descended, the exact timestamps, the undeniable path that led him beneath miles of Wyoming prairie and into a facility that allegedly does not exist. He doesn't know who built Facility 7. He doesn't know who operates it. He doesn't know what those endless identical doors hide. But he knows something is down there, something the world is not supposed to know about. Something that was loaded into his trailer in silent darkness and transported beneath the radar of every agency he contacted. And sometimes, on long night drives, when the CB radio static quiets and the highway is empty, he remembers the rising gate, the pulsing blue lights, and the weight of those black containers. He wonders if somewhere beneath him, under the asphalt and dirt, another gate is waiting, another tunnel, another chamber of sealed doors leading farther down. He wonders if one day, Facility 7 will need him again. Ryan Mitchell was a third-generation trucker who'd inherited his father's love for the night shift, the long empty stretches of highway, and the feeling of belonging only road veterans understand. On July 17, 2020, he was hauling a refrigerated load from Seattle to Boise, running eastbound on Interstate 90. He'd driven this route hundreds of times. He knew the sound of every turn, every rumble strip, every lonely minute between Spokane and the wide-open dark of eastern Washington. Around 3:00 a.m., when most drivers were asleep and the world had gone quiet, Ryan noticed headlights growing brighter in his mirrors. Another semi was approaching fast, unusual for that hour. As the vehicle pulled alongside, the glow revealed a classic 1970s Kenworth, polished chrome gleaming so clean it looked unreal under the night sky. The driver inside waved at Ryan, smiling wide, giving a cheerful thumbs up as if they were old friends. Something about his expression felt timeless, but Ryan waved back anyway. The Kenworth surged forward and disappeared into the darkness ahead. 10 minutes later, another truck approached. This one a pristine 1980s Peterbilt. The woman behind the wheel grinned at him as she passed, her rig roaring with the deep, old-school engine sound that modern trucks no longer had. Ryan blinked, wondering if there was some kind of vintage truck rally happening overnight, though he hadn't heard anything about one. Within minutes, more headlights appeared behind him, then more silhouettes of classic rigs sliding into formation. They were all immaculate, every chrome edge perfect, every paint job flawless. He counted 12. All from the 70s and 80s, all glowing like showroom models. They cruised beside him and ahead of him, a loose convoy moving with eerie precision. Curious, Ryan reached for his CB and flipped to channel 19. "This is Ryan heading eastbound on 90, he said lightly. "Looks like we've got ourselves a vintage truck show tonight." "You all headed to a rally or something?" He expected laughter or trucker chatter. Instead, a voice crackled through thick static, distorted as if coming from far beyond the range of modern radios. "We're heading home, driver," the man said. "Been on the road a long time. You're welcome to join us if you like." The tone was friendly, but the sound of it wasn't right. Hollow, distant, stretched thin like someone calling across a canyon. Before Ryan could respond, the trucks tightened formation, their spacing perfect, their speed locked at an exact 65 mph. He noticed none of them had modern lighting. All incandescent markers, no LEDs, no updated dot reflectors, nothing that should be allowed on the road today. They didn't even have the modern aerodynamic panels newer trucks required. They were period accurate down to the last bolt. The kind of rigs you'd see only in old magazines or in a museum collection, except these were alive, roaring, breathing diesel into the night. The lead Kenworth slowed until it paced Ryan's cab. The driver motioned for Ryan to roll down his window. Against his better judgment, he did. The wind hit him in a cold burst, but the voice that followed chilled him more. "Beautiful night for driving, isn't it?" the man shouted. "Reminds me of the old days. No traffic. No scales. No electronic logs. Just the open road." His mouth smiled wide, but his voice sounded impossibly far away, like an echo from a radio tower miles off. Ryan tried to brush off the unease crawling up his spine, telling himself he was just tired. The convoy guided him along for another 30 miles before the lead truck suddenly braked. All 12 slowed in flawless unison and veered onto an exit Ryan had never seen before. He passed this stretch constantly. He knew every mile marker by heart. But there it was, a faded sign reading, "Old 90 Historic Route." He frowned at the unfamiliar name. Washington had decommissioned old sections of roads before, but he'd never heard of any along this part of the highway. The convoy had already taken the ramp. Against his instincts, Ryan followed. The pavement changed instantly. The asphalt was cracked, faded, covered in decades of wear. The road dipped lower than the interstate, hidden from modern travelers by an earthen berm. He adjusted in his seat, trying to suppress the building anxiety. The trucks maintained their eerie symmetry, rolling like a single organism. They passed an ancient truck stop, Murphy's Travel Plaza, its faded sign reading 24 HOUR. Service. The building was pitch black, long abandoned, but one of the trucks slowed beside it as if considering stopping before accelerating again. Several miles in, Ryan noticed something even stranger. The landscape had changed. Trees were smaller, sparse. The power lines he knew lined this whole corridor were completely absent. Even the road signs, what few remained, were painted in a style he'd only seen in photos from the 1970s. A cold sweat broke out across his neck. He glanced at his GPS, blank. Not lost. Not rerouting. The map displayed nothing at all, just his truck icon floating in empty terrain. His phone had no service. The CB filled with chatter between the other drivers, using slang he'd only heard in stories from the old days, talking about truck stops and way stations that no longer existed. He tried to slow down, deciding this was enough adventure for the night. But his truck didn't respond. The brake pedals stiffened under his foot. The steering wheel resisted him, guiding itself back into perfect alignment with the convoy. His speedometer held at 65, though his foot barely touched the accelerator. Panic surged. He was locked in. His truck was being driven for him. The lead driver's voice filled the CV again. "Don't fight it, son. You accepted the invitation when you followed us off the interstate. We've been short one for a long time. Need one more truck to complete the circuit. One more driver to help us finish the route we started so long ago. You'll like it with us. No logbooks, no regulations. Just the road. Forever." The overlapping laughter of the other drivers poured through the radio in warped echoes, rising and falling like distant coyote howls. The old road curved, and in the distance headlights approached head-on, a modern semi barreling toward them on the narrow lane. Impossible. No one else should be on this forgotten stretch. But the truck kept coming. As it drew closer, Ryan's heart stopped. He recognized the truck. The grill, the bumper sticker, the dent in the corner panel, his own semi. And worse, the driver inside was him, his face contorted in terror, screaming silently, eyes wide and frantic. Then, in a blink, The truck passed through the convoy like a ghosted reflection and vanished behind him down the dark stretch. The realization hit him like a punch. The convoy wasn't just a group of old trucks, it was a loop. A trap. A collection of drivers caught in some twisted echo of time, running endless circuits of the road that no longer existed. Those vintage trucks weren't restored, they were preserved, frozen exactly as they were when their drivers vanished decades ago. And now they wanted him. But Ryan had something they didn't. His refrigerated trailer had a manual override emergency shutdown switch, a safety feature in case of dangerous pressure buildup. Acting on instinct, he reached back and slammed the switch. The refrigeration unit shut down in an explosive pop, instantly altering the weight and drag on his trailer. His entire truck lurched violently. For the first time, the steering wheel jerked free in his hands. He seized the moment. He twisted the wheel hard right, tearing the semi off the cracked pavement and launching himself into the open desert scrub. The convoy remained perfectly aligned on the old road, unaffected, not following, simply continuing on its eternal path. They didn't stop. Didn't look back. They just rolled on, swallowed by a bend in the forgotten highway. Ryan's truck slammed across rough dirt, skidding through sagebrush and bouncing over rocks until the silhouette of the modern interstate rose ahead. He found a maintenance slope and roared up toward the embankment. The moment his tires hit the real pavement, his GPS flickered back. His phone buzzed with notifications. His CB crackled with familiar modern chatter. He was back. He didn't stop until the next real truck stop, where he sat shaking for nearly an hour. When his company asked about the damages, he claimed he'd swerved to avoid a deer and gone off-road. They repaired the truck without pressing further. But Ryan never took Interstate 90 through that stretch at night again. Instead, he added hours to every run by taking the Southern Oregon route, no matter the delay, no matter the cost. Because every now and then, just before dawn, he sees faint headlights pacing him from somewhere off to the side. Too low, too distant, too perfect. And he knows that convoy is still out there, rolling through the ghost of old Highway 90, waiting for another driver to follow them home. And he knows the road remembers everyone who ever traveled it. Sometimes, it comes back for them. Sarah Kim had been driving overnight routes through Montana for 4 years, specializing in medical supply deliveries that demanded perfect timing. On February 3, 2022, she left Billings just before midnight with a trailer full of urgently needed medication for a hospital in Missoula. The run was familiar. Long stretches of empty interstate, frost-bitten darkness, and temperatures that sank far below anything humans were meant to endure. That night, the cold felt predatory, a dangerous -15 degrees with wind that scraped at her windshield like claws. She kept the heater high, hands steady on the wheel as she cut through the blackness along Interstate 90. At 2:15 a.m., approaching mile marker 237, she noticed something wrong. Something standing where nothing should be. On the shoulder ahead, illuminated faintly by her headlights, was a woman in a light blue dress. No coat, no gloves. No sense of the brutal cold that could kill someone in minutes. She wasn't waving for help or flagging down traffic. She was simply standing still, facing the highway as if waiting for someone specific. Sarah's first thought was that the woman was in severe danger. Exposure at that temperature was a death sentence. She slowed immediately, pulling her truck onto the shoulder 30 yards beyond the figure. Her hazard lights bathed the highway in pulsing orange. She grabbed her emergency blanket and coat, shoved the door open, and stepped into the biting wind. The woman hadn't moved an inch. Sarah called out, asking if she was hurt, if she needed assistance, but the woman gave no sign she'd heard. Only when Sarah took a few steps closer did the woman slowly turn her head toward her. And what Sarah saw forced her breath to catch sharply in her throat. The woman's face was streaked with frozen tears, glittering in the faint light like broken glass. Her eyes were impossibly wide and unblinking, as if she'd forgotten how to blink at all. Her lips moved silently, forming the same phrase again and again. No voice, no sound. Just the repetition of words she seemed trapped inside. Sarah stepped cautiously closer, trying to read her lips. It took a moment before the phrase registered. He's still down there. He's still down there. The woman's voice didn't match her lips because there was no voice, just the movement. Just the desperate repetition. Sarah looked around in confusion. Down where? The highway here was elevated, a steep embankment dropping off into the darkness to the right. An accident, maybe? A stranded driver? Someone trapped below? The possibilities twisted her stomach. She asked the woman who was down there and whether someone was injured. The woman raised one shaking hand, pointing directly toward the black void beyond the guardrail. Then she looked Sarah in the eyes, her lips stopping suddenly. When her voice finally came, it chilled Sarah deeper than the wind ever could. "Will you help me get him out? I've been trying for so long, but I can't do it alone." Every instinct screamed at Sarah to run back to her truck, slam the door, and drive away without looking back. Nothing about this felt normal. Nothing about this felt human. But if someone was injured down that embankment, if someone was dying in the snow, she had a responsibility to help. That truth alone kept her rooted. She forced herself to pull out her phone and called 911, reporting what she'd seen. Dispatch told her emergency services would arrive within 20 minutes. Long minutes, she thought. Too long if someone was hurt. The woman in the blue dress began moving toward the embankment, gliding more than walking. Sarah followed, shining her flashlight down the slope. 30 feet below, cradled in a tangle of snow-covered bushes, she saw the warped metal frame of a car. A 1990s sedan, crushed and iced over, so deeply blanketed with snow it looked almost fossilized. It hadn't crashed recently. This thing had been there a long time. Sarah slid down the embankment on unsteady feet, slipping on ice, catching herself on branches. But the woman drifted effortlessly down the slope, her feet barely disturbing the snow. Sarah's flashlight beam struck the shattered driver's window, and when she leaned closer, her entire body stiffened. A man sat behind the wheel. His face was frozen in an agonizing expression, eyes wide in terror. His hands still clutched the wheel. He was long dead, weeks or months, preserved by the cold. More statue than body. Sarah stumbled backward, her breath fogging violently in front of her. She looked toward the woman, who stood on the other side of the car, her dress fluttering gently though no wind reached the bottom of the slope.
"You see him?"
the woman whispered. "Now he won't be alone anymore." Sarah scrambled back up the embankment, slipping, sliding, driven only by fear and instinct. When she reached the highway and spun around to look again, the embankment was empty. The woman in the blue dress had vanished without a trace. The state police arrived minutes later. Sarah showed them the wreck, and officers climbed down carefully to investigate. Their lights illuminated the interior of the car, and the confirmation came quickly. The body had been there for around 4 months. The victim was identified as Thomas Reynolds, missing since October 2021. His wife, Catherine Reynolds, had died in the same accident. She had been thrown from the vehicle during the crash, her body recovered at the time. Thomas's car, however, had gone over the embankment in a way that hid it from search crews. The snow and brush had kept it concealed even from experienced investigators. An officer handed Sarah a photo of Catherine. Her breath caught. It was her. The same woman she had seen, the same blue dress, the same frozen tears. The officer explained the facts like it was routine. Catherine had been declared dead at the scene, but Thomas had never been found. Search efforts were extensive, but ultimately futile. The case eventually went cold. Sarah told the officers everything she had witnessed, every detail, but their skepticism was clear. Hypothermia, they said, could cause hallucinations. Stress could distort memory. Darkness played tricks on tired minds. But Sarah knew those explanations weren't enough. What she had seen was real. Catherine Reynolds had been waiting. 4 months of cold nights. 4 months of unfinished purpose. 4 months of searching for someone who could help her bring her husband home. Sarah resumed her usual routes in the weeks that followed, passing mile marker 237 again and again. Each time, the shoulder was empty, silent, ordinary. No woman in a dress. No figure calling out without sound. No lingering presence. But something changed there. A small memorial appeared. Fresh flowers, always tended, always replaced. Sarah eventually learned that Thomas's daughter visited the spot every week to honor both parents. She left 2 bouquets each time, one for each person lost on that highway. Sarah often replayed that night in her mind. The silent lips, the frozen tears, the voice that didn't belong to the living. She wondered how many others lingered on lonely highways, trapped between worlds, desperate for someone who could see them, someone who could hear their final message. She drove more carefully now, slowed down when something felt off, paid attention to the edges of the dark where figures sometimes seemed to stand just outside the reach of her lights. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. She understood. Sometimes the dead needed help. Sometimes the living were the only ones who could finish the story. And sometimes love lingered far beyond tragedy, tethering two souls to a place where one waited and the other waited to be found. Sarah knew the road was haunted, not by malice, but by devotion. By the kind of connection that didn't break even after life ended. By those who refused to leave someone behind in the cold darkness of Montana. And she knew that if she ever saw someone like that again, someone out of place on a freezing highway, someone who looked wrong in a way that prickled deep in her bones, she would stop. She would listen. Because on that night at mile marker 237, she had learned the truth. Sometimes the dead whisper louder than the living, and sometimes the living are the only ones who can set them free. David Foster had been an owner-operator for 15 years, running freight across the sprawling deserts and empty highways of the American Southwest in his customized Freightliner. He loved the freedom of the road, the long silent stretches where the only sound was his engine and the crackle of his vintage CB radio. That radio was his pride, an old-school setup he'd spent years tuning and restoring, a link to the era when truckers talked all night and shared the road like a brotherhood. On August 9, 2021, David was heading south on Highway 28-5 through New Mexico, pushing toward Carlsbad just past midnight. The heat still clung to the asphalt even at that late hour, the sky clear, stars sharp above the desert. Nothing unusual. Nothing that hinted his life was about to warp into something he would never fully understand. His CB radio hissed with static, then suddenly burst alive with voices. Two truckers were talking. Easy conversation about road conditions, fuel prices, the stuff drivers always compared to kill time on long runs. David barely listened until one detail made him reach for the volume knob. They were talking about a snowstorm on Interstate 40 near Albuquerque. Snow. In August. He glanced at the weather app on his phone. Clear skies, temperatures hovering in the mid-80s. There wasn't a snowflake within 1,000 miles of New Mexico. He figured maybe he was catching skip signals, radio waves bouncing off the ionosphere, letting him overhear drivers from Wyoming or Montana. It happened sometimes, and with a vintage setup like his, it happened more often than he liked to admit. But then one of the truckers mentioned something he couldn't ignore. "I'm passing the Big Chief truck stop now. Gonna grab some fuel and Rosie's famous chili." David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The Big Chief. A landmark he knew better than most. It had stood along Highway 285 for decades, until it closed in 2003 and got demolished in 2005. He'd watched the wrecking crew tear it down himself on a run years back. Nothing stood there now but an empty dirt patch and a small historical marker. No lights. No diner. No fuel pumps. Just dead space where a piece of trucking history used to be. He grabbed the mic and keyed in. "Breaker 19, this is David southbound on 285. You boys talking about the Big Chief?" "That place has been gone for years." Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Then one of the voices responded like David had just told him the sky was purple. "Gone? Partner, I'm looking right at it. Parking lot's full tonight. And what do you mean years?" "It's December 14th, 1987. Where exactly you calling from?" David stiffened. He looked at his dashboard clock. August 9th, 2021. His GPS confirmed his location. He was closing in on the exact spot where the Big Chief once stood. His pulse thudded in his ears. He kept driving, slowly, cautiously, each second stretching out as if time itself was holding its breath. And then he saw it. The impossible. The Big Chief truck stop, glowing in the darkness like a beacon from another life. Neon signs pulsed. The diner windows glowed warm gold. Trucks filled the lot. Old rigs, all from the 1980s, polished and gleaming like they were straight off the assembly line. Cars pulled up to gas pumps that had been gone for nearly 20 years. People walked across the pavement in clothing styles that didn't belong to this century, and David, frozen, breath lodged in his throat, recognized every detail. It was the Big Chief exactly as he remembered it when he first started driving. He slammed on his brakes and veered onto the shoulder, staring at the sight through his windshield. His hands shook as he grabbed his phone and started recording. But when he looked down at the screen, the video showed nothing, just the dark, empty lot and the historical marker. Not a single light, not a single truck, not one trace of the bustling scene in front of him. It was as if only his eyes could see the past bleeding through. The CB crackled again. "You still there, partner? You said this is 2021. That's 34 years from now. How are we hearing you? This some kind of joke?" Their confusion mirrored his. He tried to explain what he was seeing, but the words tangled in his throat. How do you tell someone from 1987 that their present is your past? How do you tell them they're talking to someone who hasn't even started kindergarten yet? Before David could respond, another voice broke in. This one was older, rougher, carrying a weight that froze every nerve in David's body. "Listen to me. Both of you. What's happening is a temporal overlap. Happens rarely, but sometimes the timeline gets thin. You're seeing each other across decades." The voice took a breath, steady but urgent. "David from 2021, do not approach that truck stop. It's not really there for you. If you enter it, you'll step into 1987 and you won't get back. Stay in your truck. Stay in your time." David's chest tightened. "Who is this? How do you know my name? How do you know what's happening?" The answer came without hesitation. "Because I've been where you are. I made the mistake of going inside. I'm trapped here now, in a loop of December 14th, 1987. And I've been trying to warn drivers for years. You're the first one who's ever heard me. My name is Robert Chen. Look me up when you get home. You'll find I was reported missing in December 1987, Highway 285, near the old Big Chief truck stop." David felt the world tilt under him. His breath came fast and shallow, the truck suddenly feeling too small, too fragile against the weight of the impossible. The Big Chief shimmered before him, its lights flickering like a mirage. But it wasn't a mirage. It was there, just not in his time. He could see two versions of the same space now overlaying each other. The bright, bustling truck stop of 1987. The empty, abandoned lot of 2021. Both real. Both impossible. Both occupying the same stretch of desert night. His eyes burned, trying to make sense of it. Everything in him begged to get out of the truck, to walk toward the warm light at the diner and see Rosie behind the counter one more time. He wanted to breathe that familiar smell of diesel and chili and old coffee pots. He wanted to step backward into the part of his life when the road still felt young and full of possibility. But Robert's voice came again, sharper, urgent. "David, you need to leave. The overlap lasts about 15 minutes. If you're here when it closes, you'll end up like me, stuck between times. You'll see both eras forever, but you won't belong to either. Go. Now." David's heart pounded so loudly he barely heard himself turn the key. The engine roared back to life, and with trembling hands he pulled onto the road. As he accelerated, he stared into his mirror. The Big Chief flickered like a damaged neon sign. Trucks faded. The diner dimmed. People blurred into shadows. And then, within seconds, it all collapsed into darkness. The lot was empty again. Cold. Dead. Just as it had been for almost 2 decades. His CB radio went silent except for the casual chatter of modern truckers. No more voices from the past. No more warnings. No more Robert. David drove to Carlsbad in a daze, delivered his load mechanically, and went straight to a motel where he spent hours researching the name Robert Chen. And there it was. Newspaper clippings, local reports, a missing persons bulletin from December 1987. A trucker vanished on Highway 285. Last seen at the Big Chief truck stop. Truck found abandoned on the shoulder. No sign of the driver. Case never solved. He didn't file an official report. Who would believe a story like his? Instead, he wrote everything down in detail, saved the video empty though it was, and marked the exact coordinates. Over time, he shared the story only with drivers he trusted, men and women who already believed the highway held things no map or GPS could explain. Some laughed. Some nodded solemnly and shared their own accounts of strange places where the world didn't behave the way it should. Now, David drives Highway 285 more often than he needs to, always at night. He watches the dark desert for even the faintest shimmer of light where no light should be. Part of him wants to see it again, just to know he wasn't losing his mind, and part of him fears the overlap will return because he knows how badly he'll want to stop. How dangerously tempting that warm glow will be. The past isn't gone. It waits beneath the surface of the present, layered like old paint. And sometimes, just sometimes, the layers grow thin enough for a man to see through. Somewhere in that fracture, in that thin electric tear between years, Robert Chen is still trapped in 1987, living the same night over and over, watching trucks from the future pass like ghosts he can't touch, waiting for the rare moments when the timelines align and his warning can slip through the static. David prays Robert finds peace someday, but he fears the man is condemned to repeat his final night forever, a silent guardian of a place that should never be entered, a living echo trapped in a time that refuses to let him go. And David knows one thing with absolute certainty: the road remembers everything. And sometimes it plays its memories back. Some memories look like invitations, some look like open doors. But they are always traps, waiting for the next curious soul who makes the mistake of stepping inside. Patricia Morrison had spent 12 years driving solo, preferring the independence and quiet rhythm of long-haul routes. On May 2023, she accepted a rush delivery job hauling construction materials from Oklahoma City to Salt Lake City. The run took her through the northwestern corner of Oklahoma, across the empty stretch of Highway 412 that cut through flat, desolate country with almost no towns and even fewer services. At around 4 in the morning, with the night at its darkest, she noticed a pair of headlights growing larger in her mirrors. Another truck was approaching fast. Patricia checked her speed. She was already doing the limit, then eased slightly to the right to let the driver pass. But the truck copied her movement, staying locked behind her, far too close. She finally got a clear look at it, a black Peterbilt with no company markings, its windows tinted so dark she couldn't see anything inside. She nudged her speed higher. The truck matched her. She slowed down. It slowed too, keeping a perfect 20-foot distance like it was glued to her trailer. She grabbed her CB. "This is Patricia eastbound on 412. Black Peterbilt behind me. You're following awful close. Need you to back off or pass, buddy." Nothing. She switched to channel 19, then 17, then rifled through the emergency channels. Still nothing. The black truck held its position like a silent, patient animal. She considered calling 911, but imagined the dispatch operator asking what crime had been committed. Another truck on the same highway wasn't illegal, but something about this was wrong enough to make her pulse thicken. A few minutes later, she saw more headlights ahead. 3 trucks were pulled over on the shoulder with their hazard lights flashing. As she approached, she saw drivers out of their cabs waving frantically for her to stop. Patricia eased off the accelerator, trying to decide whether to pull over, when her CB finally crackled to life with a burst of static. "Do not stop. Whatever you do not stop for them. Keep driving." The voice was a woman's, tight, strained, urgent. Patricia looked at the line of trucks as she passed. The drivers all gestured wildly, pointing behind her at the black Peterbilt. But the black truck didn't slow or budge. It followed her like a shadow pinned to her rear bumper. More headlights appeared ahead. 5 trucks this time, all pulled to the shoulder with drivers waving her down with frantic desperation. The CB crackled again with the same urgent female voice. "They're already taken." "You're still free. Stay moving, and maybe you can get out of this." Patricia's heart hammered. Taken? What did that mean? She pressed her radio, her voice shaking. "Who is this? What's happening? What's that black truck doing?" The reply chilled her. "It's a harvester. It picks up drivers one by one and adds them to the convoy. I'm 3 trucks ahead of you. I've been driving the same stretch of highway for 2 days straight. Every time I think I'm past it, the road loops back. There are dozens of us now. Maybe hundreds. We can't stop. We can't turn off. We just drive while that black truck decides who to take next. You're the newest. You're still at the back. If you can get past all of us, maybe you can break free." Patricia glanced at her GPS. It showed her moving normally east on Highway 412, nothing unusual. But outside the windows, the landscape repeated like a broken tape. She passed the same grain elevator again. Then the same abandoned gas station, the same faded billboard. She was looping, just like the voice warned, driving a stretch of road that wasn't letting her leave. Ahead, the shoulder lit up with more trucks. An entire line this time, hazard lights strobing in the darkness. She counted at least 20. As she rolled past them, the trapped drivers watched her with hollow, exhausted eyes. Some mouthed silent warnings, some beat helpless fists against their cabs. Others just stared with a vacant defeat that made her stomach twist. Behind each group, more black Peterbilts lined the highway like a dark fence, preventing any escape. Her CB exploded with overlapping voices, all desperate, all trapped. It's been 6 days for me. I'm almost out of fuel, but the tank never empties. My family thinks I'm dead. The black truck shows me things, terrible things. If I try to stop, there's no escape. Save yourself while you can. Patricia's hands were slippery on the steering wheel. Her speedometer showed 70, but the landmarks repeated in a nightmare loop. She was running in place, pinned inside some impossible stretch of highway controlled by black trucks that should not exist. Then she noticed something, a tiny pattern her fear-sharpened mind caught. The black Peterbilt behind her wasn't perfectly consistent. Its following distance fluttered slightly, 20 feet, 25, 15, then back to 20. Tiny, almost imperceptible errors. But errors meant it wasn't flawless. Errors meant it could be tricked. She waited, forcing herself to breathe evenly, watching the odometer for the exact sequence of repeating landmarks. Grain elevator, gas station, billboard. As the last one appeared, she did the thing that terrified her more than anything. She slammed her brakes, hard enough to jolt her body forward, but not enough to jackknife her trailer. The black truck behind her reacted too late. It slammed into the back of her trailer with a crunch of metal. It wasn't a catastrophic hit, but the moment the impact happened, Patricia felt something change. A sensation like pressure releasing from the inside of her skull, like a static-filled hum dissolving. She stomped the accelerator. Her truck surged forward. In her mirrors, the black Peterbilt fell behind, losing ground, unable to keep its perfect lock on her. And then the scenery outside changed. New mile markers, new signs, new sky. The trapped trucks vanished. The road straightened into a world that felt real again. Her GPS updated with new data, no loops, no repetition. She kept driving, 2 hours, then 3, refusing to stop until she reached the first safe, brightly lit truck stop in Kansas. By the time she parked, she was shaking so badly she could barely unbuckle her seatbelt. She checked her truck's computer logs. What she saw made her blood run cold. During the hours she'd been trapped, her truck had logged nearly 1,200 miles of travel. But GPS data showed she'd only moved 15 miles. Her fuel consumption matched the impossible distance. Her onboard safety system flagged the collision as impact with unknown vehicle, though her trailer showed almost no visible damage. Patricia reported the incident to her company, giving them the most believable version she could. She'd been followed aggressively by an unmarked truck and escaped after a sudden stop. She left out the looping highway, the ghost convoy, the voices. They accepted her explanation without pushing. She never took a route through northwestern Oklahoma again. In the weeks after, she dug into Highway 412, searching for anything that matched what she'd endured. What she found horrified her, scattered, barely documented reports of trucks vanishing along the panhandle. Drivers never found. Rigs discovered abandoned with their engines still running, lights on, fuel untouched. Some reports dated back decades. Others were more recent. No one had explanations. At night, Patricia lay awake thinking of the drivers she passed, those hollow eyes pleading for help she couldn't give, trapped in that endless loop, their black truck jailers guarding them like livestock. She wondered whether they were still out there, driving the same strip of highway in the dark, looping forever, waiting for the harvester truck to choose its next victim. She replayed the moment she braked, imagining what would have happened if she hadn't noticed the variation in following distance, if she'd kept driving, repeating that cursed stretch until she became one of them. Her family would have wondered where she went. Her truck would be found miles from the world she left behind, maybe still idling with faint tire marks circling the same patch of asphalt. Patricia still drove for a living, but she changed her habits. She avoided the remotest routes. She kept her CB turned on at all hours, listening for voices that might signal another impossible convoy. And when she saw black Peterbilts with no company decals and windows tinted darker than night, she gave them a wide berth, never letting one settle behind her. Because she knew something now, something most people would never believe. There are things on American highways that hunt drivers. Supernatural entities that twist reality, creating roads within roads, traps that look like open freedom until it's too late. They harvest truckers one by one, adding them to convoys that never end. And somewhere out there, on a lonely stretch of Highway 412, the black trucks are still watching. Still waiting. Still harvesting. Their eternal convoy moves through a highway that goes nowhere, forever looping under a sky that never changes. And Patricia knows she escaped something that does not let go easily. She just hopes it never finds her again.